Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Philip.
Sorry. Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
And how you guys been? I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks.
Good.
Very well.
I think you've been on.
Driving.
You've done lots of driving. Where to?
I went to. I went to Lincolnshire for a day, so I ended up coming back on the day. So I did about 10 hours that day.
Ouch.
And I've been to Hastings. So yeah,
Nice.
loads of places.
Enjoy
I used
yourself.
to live near Hastings.
Did you? Where do you live?
Eastbourne.
Oh, that is near Hastings. Yeah, it was good. It was good fun. I saw some family, so it was very good.
I'm not sure if I'm convinced by that. And what about you, Philip? You've been on holiday, sort of, haven't you?
Yeah, and sort of. Like a friend of mine just decided to drop in, and so I've been hosting him and showing him around. And so I sort of rediscovered where I live, because like this weird thing happens when you're sort of like the. I mean, when you're showing other people around, right, you're sort of forced to come up with places to show them, and that sort of forces you to see everything through a different lens. It's actually quite interesting, but it was a ton of fun. We like toured all around, like visited 3 different countries basically, because they're all sort of bunched up, and yeah, it was very, very nice actually.
Nice one.
Yeah, sounds
It's
it.
good for the mental health as well.
Yeah,
when you-
that
yeah.
especially, yes, because
Did-
it sort of, especially for me, it sort of freed me up a bit of certain limitations, and it's always
Twitter.
healthy. Yeah, that as well. That as well. Yeah.
Did you have a complete social media break in this time?
Yeah, basically, yes. I just didn't have the time, honestly, to check in. So,
Amazing.
So I didn't, and yeah. Now that I logged back in, I'm sort of reminded how it all works, and yeah, I'm not that enthusiastic about it.
No, I don't blame you. We've had a few interactions on social media. Just hello to everybody who's already in the chat. Dallas and Josiah, how you doing? Good to have you here. And anyone else out there who's currently watching, feel free to drop in and say hello to us. I figured actually today, before we start on tonight's topic, I wanted to just cover off a little bit of bullshit from social media. So the first one.
Get me up to speed. That's great.
So I don't believe gods do not exist. I just think they're imaginary or literary creations. As in, well, what is something that's imaginary, Luke?
Something that doesn't exist.
Right. And Philip, what's something that's purely a literary creation?
Well, if it's purely a literary creation, then it would seem that it doesn't actually exist in reality. And yeah.
So would you agree in both instances that they think that God doesn't have an objective reality?
Yeah.
And Dave, if someone thinks that's the case, how else could we phrase that?
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah. In other words, they hold the belief that God does not exist. Yet they're hiding behind other words. Another one that came up today, this one was on Facebook, was atheism isn't a belief, it's a conclusion. Which in itself is another...
And how are babies atheists?
Well, because how can they conclude? Yes. And when you actually conclude something to be the case, you're sort of holding it as true. And so if you're accepting a conclusion, you're basically saying you believe this conclusion, are you not?
Yeah, I tweeted that thing out on April 1st, 2021, in saying that this is the best take on atheism that there is and ever will be, and it got 240 likes.
Loads of shares.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I was clearly being sarcastic, but apparently a lot of people took it seriously.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Someone else also claimed that it's only a belief if it's in regards to mythical creatures or gods or things like that.
Wait. Can you explain that one for me?
Basically, they were talking about how, accepting evidence isn't the same as believing it because it has to be something that's unproven to be a belief.
So, sorry.
It's not my crazy man.
No, but when the court of law is used quite a lot in atheist rhetoric, right? They talk about the burden of proof and stuff, and they use a courtroom. And I'm pretty sure that they kind of use the word belief when they're referring to the jury. Like, do you believe that this person committed this offence? When they're referring to it, and then they obviously have to accept the evidence in order to believe that somebody committed an offence.
You'd think.
It's just so inconsistent.
Yes. Yes, it is. There was another one as well that popped up today that I thought was absolutely terrible, which was saying someone, Atheist Crusade or Anti-Theist Crusade or something like that, was saying that he thinks theists should be kept in zoos. Like, really? And how often do atheists like to say that they've got better morals than theists? Now, does that really demonstrate better morality? Oh, well, I suppose if it's all subjective, then Oh, man. So, hey, Rev, nice to have you here as well.
Have you got the intelligence one as well? That one was funny.
The intelligence one? What one was that?
IQ one.
Oh, God, yes.
That's just a massive argument about atheists being more intelligent.
I forgot about that one.
38 studies, meta-analysis. Atheists are more intelligent.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but I have a whole study, what's it called, on that, and it's not necessarily because of the things you think it is.
Well, the thing is, Evans basically said, "Oh, we're not that bright," as in Evans is an atheist like all of us, and he's talking about atheists in general are not that bright, right? That's all he was saying.
Yeah.
You were not the brightest bunch. That was, thank you. Which is, a fair enough comment from a number of conversations we've had on social media. It's quite easy to conclude that. And this guy basically started responding and having a go and posted something that basically showed a spread of about 5 IQ points. And so the average between 6 IQ points, 105 and 1011. So both just slightly above average in that. So both theists and atheists and agnostics and there was something else in between, liberal, I think they had in there. I don't know what that one was supposed to be.
Actually religious categories, so
no,
there was a big issue there as well. And
there was a spread of 5 points around the average scheme. So if you turned it into sort of percentages, it's like the difference between 65% and 67% and going, yeah, we're much smarter than you. No, you're about the same. It's nothing worth bragging about. Not to mention, IQ is not the best measure. It's indicative of someone's ability to pick up new things quite quickly. But there's a hell of a lot of bias in it. I mean, do you want to cover that off briefly, Luke, before we get on with tonight's topic?
Yeah, I mean, just the whole test was made as a test to kind of further eugenics. So off the bat, it's designed to kind of be elitist in its nature. It has been studied intensively, and it's not no psychologists are not anywhere near agreed upon whether it's an actual measure of general intelligence or not. and it relies heavily on you knowing information about the context of your society. So if, like, for instance, I did, like, someone posted one of the tests and was like, oh, I've got like 150 IQ on this test, and it was a rubbish test. And one of the questions was about money, and it was like, how many coins do you need for this amount of money? And it said dimes, quarters, nickels, and I was like, I have no idea, because I don't know what American money is. I don't know what these it's not a metric system apparently, so I don't know. And that would well, it didn't seem like a metric system. It wasn't.
It's 5s, 10s, 25s.
Why didn't they just do cents? 25 cents, 30 cents, like, you know, that would have been much easier. You know, because of that, my score would have been lower, right? So it relies on you having some sort of education. And so when you take it to, like, different cultures and stuff, and you're like, we're going to see the IQ of this race, and then you use that test. And then you're like, oh, they did really badly. And then it's like, well, yeah, because they don't know anything about your culture. Like, give them questions about their culture relating to them, and then it will change it. And you'll find that the average is the same across the board. Like, so it's just ridiculous. And it's like, sorry, just one more thing, because we can have a whole stream on this if you want. But the kind of the spread is always at 100. So, and our average intelligence has been going up over time. So if you have an IQ of 100 now, you might have had an IQ of like 120 50 years ago, right? So you're technically more intelligent, but it seems like you're less intelligent because the spread's going up, because people are better educated. Yep. So people make out like it's this really innate thing that you have. Those IQ, it's static, it doesn't move and stuff. Yet we're seeing that better education leads to better IQ scores, and they're having to adjust it accordingly because they need that 100, that nice bell curve they call it, 100 mark. So it's just, yeah, it's really bad. It's over-egged massively. People brag about it if they have an IQ of like 120. It's like, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't talk anything about other skills in their life, like their emotional intelligence and their ability to build things or anything like that. Rant over.
I know you've been wanting to get that one off your chest for a little while. Every time that comes up.
Sorry, but just with the atheist thing as well. Like, so I wrote an article, and it's about this very thing, and there's a lot of intellectual gatekeeping in the atheist community, in that they're not accepting if you're not clever enough to understand evolution, which you don't need to understand to be an atheist, or they're not accepting if you're not clever enough to understand epistemology, which most atheists don't understand anyway. And it's like, so they kind of shut people out. They're like, oh, you're not a real atheist if you don't understand this thing or this thing. And it's like, you know, just like let that go a little bit. Like, you don't need to be constantly gatekeeping this thing, being like, we're so intelligent, and then like shunning people that are less intelligent than you. Sorry, there we go, done.
Just wait for it.
No, I thought it was gatekeeping on epistemology.
We do, but it's also them.
Yeah. Were there any others that need to be brought up before we continue? You know, have we managed to wash our
like
sins?
Santa Claus.
Here we go.
Santa Claus
and unicorns.
But the unicorns thing happened a while ago, right? Or is that something else?
No, literally just before I came on stream, someone else on unicorns. Yeah. But go for it with Santa Claus.
You just like seeing me rant, don't you?
I do.
So, right, just to be very clear, right, comparing Santa Claus to God is not, it doesn't work, because, you know, like, I think atheists forget that the majority of the world's population believes in some form of God, right? It's like 16% of the world's population, or even less than that. 16% of the world's population are unaffiliated with a religion. I think it's about 8% they guess are actually atheist, right? So the majority of the people in the world believe in some sort of God. No one, other than children, actually believes in Santa Claus, and they're making out like it's a really equal thing. Like, oh yeah, actually these two things equate to each other. It's like, no, Santa Claus is definitely a made-up thing that parents teach their kids to get them excited about Christmas.
Based on a real person, though. Based on a real person. Like,
Based on a
very
real
rarely
person.
are gods actually based on real people. They might have aspects woven in. You know, I think a lot of Greek mythology were a lot of heroes, and they were regarded as demigods, for example.
Yeah.
So with that sort of thing, they're sort of woven into the myth. And I mean, even Jesus, there probably was a historical Jesus that was then mythicized, but the actual gods, especially when you're talking about the omni sort of god, or even the gods of Hinduism and things like that, they're all metaphysical beings. And Santa isn't supposed to be a metaphysical being, and Santa isn't supposed to have created the universe, and so on and so forth.
No, exactly. That's the other thing as well. It's like they oh yeah, Santa isn't a necessary being. It's like, why? Well, because Christmas has to happen in every freaking universe.
Damn straight it does.
And Modern Santa was a commercial thing by Coca-Cola anyway. That was developed by Coke in order to sell more fucking Coca-Cola at Christmas.
Holidays are coming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, it's just not the same thing. And I feel like it's people who have been in religion before, who have used that as a way of getting out of religion, as a like one of their rationales, using it to justify their now lack of belief outside of it, and then trying to ridicule it in order to make it seem silly, so that they don't get pulled back into that doubt about their lack of belief.
Yeah, I mean, if they maybe admit that actually they're different, I mean, it's fair enough to view, say, gods and any sort of mythical creature or Santa all as myths, right? In your head, they're a myth, but they're very different kinds of myths, and they need to be treated differently. And it's like the unicorn example. He said, well, tell me the difference, because to me, they're just magical beings. And I was just like, okay, well, I mean, magic is the wrong sort of term to be used for a god to start with. But yes, I mean, unicorns are mythical creatures, but they're not believed to be real. There's been they're also physical creatures rather than metaphysical creatures. There's no evidence of a unicorn ever actually existing through any of the fossil layer or anything like that. And if it's a physical being, you'd expect there to be one. Generally, they're thought of actually just being a misunderstanding of people seeing rhinoceroses. So it's actually, there is a real creature, they just called it a unicorn and they described it badly, and the drawing was bad, and it just like became, the mythicized version of the unicorn. There's lots of rationale for why the unicorn is the unicorn. And after explaining this and saying, and there's more that you can think of if you can go down these lines and see how they're different. Well, no, they're just magical to me. Okay. There's no point in me continuing this conversation.
They do this weird thing where they kind of just say, if you say a unicorn, because a unicorn has mythical properties, right? It's got like something about it being, it's
horny,
tamed by a virgin or something like that. There's some mythical properties that unicorns have. There's mythical properties that Santa has. He goes around the earth in a single night and delivers presents, right?
Yep. And knows if everybody's been good or bad.
Exactly. And then they say that, well, if we replace the word God with Santa, then that means they're the same thing, because they're both mythical creatures, and if we just say God is Santa, and it's like, no, because then it'd still be God. You're just calling it Santa. That's very different from God being Santa. You're just relabeling God as Santa. And that's not how...
Yeah.
You've seen this, Philip.
Yeah, no, that's something that happens all the time, actually. When people do not, like, they will say something, oh, that could be, like, when you talk about cosmological arguments, for example, it often comes up, right? They come up with, like, oh, it could have been whatever, Santa Claus or a pixie or whatever. Right, but then if you actually look at what the theist is trying to argue, it doesn't matter how you label it, really, right? And you would have to sort of justify all the extra traits for the pixie, right? Like dimension and wings or whatever, which is very hard to do. It's already hard to do with like just something more general like a god. But if you would want to get into more detail, then you would have a really hard time. And merely calling it something else, oh, it could have been whatever. Right, it's not helping you, because you're basically granting the theist's point, right? They'll be happy accepting you labeling it as something different, as long as the conceptual thing you're granting is there, they're going to be happy with that result.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's a bit useless to play this game in my eyes, usually.
I had this discussion with somebody the other day, and it was quite a painful discussion, but he was arguing that Santa and God are the same. And he used the possible worlds argument to prove that Santa was metaphysically necessary for justice.
Wait, what?
Okay.
No, that needs explaining.
If Santa exists in some possible world, then he exists in all possible worlds, and therefore he's necessary for justice. It's just that he appears to different people in different ways.
But that doesn't.
And he thought that was a knockdown argument. Yeah.
Wait, is he saying that he believes in Santa?
No, but he did tell me that he knows adults that believe in Santa. Because my argument was that one of the main differences between Santa and God is that adults believe in God and teach it as though it is a truth, and they teach it believing that God exists, whereas with Santa, the same thing doesn't happen. And he disputed me by saying that he knows adults that believe in Santa.
No, he doesn't.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, he was
He does not.
He was just saying whatever bullshit to win an argument.
I've met hundreds of people who are mentally ill, who have psychosis. Not one of them had any psychotic experience about Santa.
Well, did any of them think they were Santa?
No.
Aww.
Jesus. I had Jesuses. I had royal family. I had people running away from MI5. I had people running away from CIA. I had people who thought they were that they were like billionaires when they had no money. All of that stuff. Not one to do with Santa. And I'm sorry, but if there's no crazy people that believe it, then there's no people that aren't mentally ill that believe it either.
Oh no, I don't believe him. He was just trying to win an argument.
Yeah, he was just. I suppose he was just saying that he knows people. In saying that, he meant that people, adults who believe in God, are like people who like adults who believe in Santa, something like that. I would imagine that was the line he was attempting. I mean, right. I don't need to explain why that doesn't work again, but like even with the necessary being argument. But yeah,
I've already finished my coffee. That's how stressed that's making me.
Yeah, I must admit I've almost finished my cider, but do we feel like we've washed away our sins and can move on a little bit? Has that made everyone feel a bit better, or are you just more stressed about the stupidity that we tend to find on the internet?
I don't know.
At least that's an honest answer. I think it would be better if that rant would then result in people going, oh yeah, I see, I understand why that's a bit of a stupid argument, my bad. But instead it'll just get people doubling down and going, no, it's the same thing. And that's
what we're gonna do, right, is we're gonna get comments on this being like, no, this is why you're wrong. No, it's not.
Right.
Yes.
I think I spent a lot longer on that bit than I intended to, but I'm glad because I quite enjoyed it. And but let's move on to tonight's actual topic. So tonight's topic is the gap. But what do we mean by the gap, Dave?
Okay, it's sort of referring to something called the explanatory gap in the philosophy of mind. So basically, there's this idea that if we were to take all of the physical facts and look at them, we wouldn't be able to figure out a priori from those facts that somebody is having some kind of inner experience, nor the kind of sensations or inner experience that they're feeling. And there seems to be this gap between the physical facts and the ontological reality. So the metaphysical account of physicalism can never actually give an explanation of why we have these sort of sensations that we do.
And what sort of explanation would you be expecting for that sort of thing? Like maybe give us an example of what's really meant by a proper explanation of something.
Okay, that's quite a long topic. I'm going to have to dig up my notes on this one. I'm sorry, I can do the rest, but I'm not.
Meanwhile, like, just as a clarification, how is this different than the hard problem of consciousness, or is it different?
It's kind of related. The hard problem of consciousness comes from this epistemic gap.
Okay.
So it's this idea that the hard problem of consciousness is this idea that there is something about our experiences that can't be explained by the physical facts alone, and there must be some other properties that come with it. So David Chalmers kind of proposes this idea that along with spin, charge, fundamental particle and fundamental forces like that, consciousness is a fundamental force of the universe. So it's a property that exists over and above the physical and comes along with the physical.
Is that sort of entailing panpsychism?
No, but Chalmers does kind of argue in a similar manner. Not that everything contains a proto-consciousness, but that consciousness is just this fundamental force of the universe.
Interesting.
But his view is very similar to an actual panpsychist view, or an idealist view, where everything comes from consciousness.
Maybe we need to get a conversation with Emerson on that one.
We do. He knows much more than I do about panpsychism. And we could always do another stream on property dualism because it's quite a big topic. And I'm mostly going to be focusing on physicalism and materialism for this one. Because that's one of the big things that people will argue, especially religious people, they'll argue that materialism can't give an explanation for consciousness because unconscious things can't give rise to consciousness.
Why not?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Yeah.
I suppose that's the same sort of thing with how can non-life generate life?
Give life, yeah.
And I mean, there's even been lab experiments that have actually shown how this sort of thing can happen. There's a TED talk on it from non-life to life, and is showing things that we wouldn't regard as life, being, searching out energy and absorbing the energy, and slowly just almost at the point where they do become life. And you can almost see through the sort of cause and effect thing how this thing could one day build the blocks of something that actually we would regard as life. So in the same regard, could we say the same thing for unconscious to conscious, but like with non-life to life, we still don't know enough to say yes, that's definitely how it happened?
Well, you can look at it this kind of way. If you have a lump of silicon, it doesn't really do very much. So you could say, well, how does silicon give rise to a CPU in a computer? How can silicon make calculations? It can't. It's just silicon. It's dead matter. But if you configure it in like the pattern of a CPU, and then it gets hooked up to another device that does the powering, and it gives rise to this other thing. So a lot of people will say something like consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, or the mind is an emergent property of the brain.
Yeah. Which sort of makes sense, I think, to all of us, actually. No, not to you, Philip.
Oh.
No, I mean, like, I suppose yes, in to a certain extent, but I'm rather skeptical, at least increasingly skeptical, of sort of a reductionist view to the strict materialism of consciousness. Like, from what I've sort of my delving into philosophy of mind, I sort of sympathize with non-reductionist views like panpsychism and others.
Yeah, there seems to be something that's not intuitive about the idea that the brain can create inner experiences of the sort that we have. Because if we think of something like Chalmers P zombies, we can conceive of some being that has all the same properties as us physically, but has no inner experience. They're just automatons, and they resemble us in every way, and they just react. And that kind of gives rise to this idea that, there must be something more than just the physical. These qualia are unique.
Yeah, so like the way I would respond to the life, to non-life to life thing, at least from my perspective, it seems like if you see life as just merely like a particular sort of chemical interaction state of a being, right? Like there is nothing inherently problematic about going from certain chemical sort of reactions to a more complex sort of chemical reaction down the line, right? Like it seems very easily, like you can very easily imagine that there doesn't seem to be a divide there because it's all on one side of the thing, right? It's just sort of reactions happening, and then they happen sort of a particular way that leads to sort of blocks, and then like it's a very straightforward way to look at it, at least from my perspective. While with consciousness, it's to me at least, and by the way, I'm like perfectly open and very like sort of tentative on my non-reductionist views so far. Right? Like, I'm still exploring, but to me, it seems like there is a much bigger problem there. Like because as you pointed out, Dave, it seems to me that you could have all of these, like if you look at any brain, right, you could have all these interactions in the brain and just be that, right? Like it doesn't seem to me intuitive to say that that those things have to give rise to some sort of first person experience, or like I don't even know how we would go about sort of trying to explain that by merely appealing to sort of connections or circuits or in the brain, something like that, right? Because whatever complex structure you come up with, right, it's still going to be like an open question to me why it's not just that complex structure and why there is actually some sort of experience to it, right? Like that is the problem. And if you go and want to say, well, like maybe it's just the case that for every sort of this complex structure, there has to be an experience to it, right? There is like it's not like this thing sort of creates it, but there has to be because of the sort of brain or whatever, or the circuit. Then it seems to me that you're already at a sort of non-reductionist view in a sense, because then you're saying, oh, it's not like this thing transforming into this other thing, it's just that it's part of it, right? Like as part of this sort of complex circuit, there is this other layer of reality, if you will, that is just a first person account. And that's how I look at sort of the hard problem of consciousness. And but I still think, just to clarify before, I still think that it seems obvious at this point that it is very strongly correlated with the brain in some sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like that much is pretty obvious. Like I would never strive from that because of the overwhelming amount of evidence. But that the thing, like I'm skeptical that consciousness itself is sort of like you can explain it, but just appealing at circuitry in the brain, if you will.
That's fair. I mean, would you say, though, if without the brain, there is no consciousness, right?
Yeah, that depends on what you mean by consciousness, I guess. And by the way, on an explanation, I wanted to just quickly, because I think explanations is also a neat thing to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a sec. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to say something about it, or?
Well, I was just going to mention this feeling that you describe, where there seems to be something intuitive, where this conscious experience is something that isn't just the physical thing. David Papineau calls that the intuition of distinctiveness. We're so used to feeling this first-person thing that we find it hard to make that the same as some kind of brain state. So our mental state, we exist in these mental states and we describe things phenomenologically. So when we point to feeling pain, we're not pointing to the C fibers firing and the neural paths in our brain. We're discussing this experience that we're having. Yeah. But it may be that this experience we have reduces to these brain states. But because when we discuss a brain state, we discuss it in terms of like a description of an object. Whereas when we discuss pain, we discuss it in terms of a phenomenological experience. So there appears to be this distinctness between the two things, and that's why we have problems reducing it to actual brain states.
Yeah, but like even if say you would say that this experience is just like this mental state, right? Like it seems to me that you could like that there's still a problem. Like I don't know how.
I agree.
There still seems to be a problem there because you're then saying, okay, well, there's this brain state, right, which is pain, and then there's your experience of pain, right? And if you say, oh well, there has to be this first person experience of pain, then you sort of it seems to me that you sort of in a non-reductionist kind of framework, right? Because you're saying, well, this is the state, and then it is accompanied by this first person experience. But this first person experience, theoretically at least, it seems that it wouldn't have to be there, because you can easily imagine that even a computer, right? Like most of us don't think of a computer as having first person experiences of what is going on. But you can imagine a computer, right? If you say about a computer, oh, this state is he's panicking, right? The kernel panic or whatever, right? Like that is just the state of the machine. There is no sort of experience.
It's not actually panicking, yeah.
It's not actually panicking, right? It's just the state. And then the question comes naturally to me, well, why is it not just like that for me, right? Like it seems obvious that I'm having this other thing to it. And yeah, okay, go ahead.
No. I was waiting to butt in, and I saw Luke about to talk, and I was telling him no.
You can butt in first, Joe. You can butt in first. I think you were about to butt in before I was about to butt in. So go for it. I'll butt in after.
Yeah, well, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but the brain is something that uses a hell of a lot of energy. It's not very efficient, is it?
No, I think it's something like a tenth of our body weight, but it's a third of our entire energy. Yeah, something like that.
So if it was to describe the actual process that was happening for pain, I can feel the C fibers, it would use more energy than going, ow. Surely the experience that it gives us actually helps reduce the energy expenditure in the same way that the computer, that's panicking and beeping isn't really telling us every little thing that's going on inside of it. It just has a random generic message. Now, I'm not saying that we should reduce ourselves down to this. I'm just saying perhaps the experience itself is part of an energy saving device. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, it seems like that there are two discussions here, right? Like one is if it is efficient to have an experience or not, right? Like if it evolutionarily perhaps makes sense to have an experience, or if it would have been more efficient to not have an experience, right? That is one thing, right? You could argue that it is more efficient to have an experience, or that it is not more efficient to have an experience, right? I don't know, but that's a different, I think, sort of argument to the other argument, which is just about explanation, right? Like, how do you explain how it actually happened, right? And that is like, these are two lanes. I actually am willing to argue on both lanes, but I just wanted to clarify that these are a bit different.
So you're saying there's a difference between saying that the reason that we have experiences is due to evolution and evolutionary pressure so experiences are down to evolution, and then there's a difference between that, having that conversation, and having a conversation around how does our experience form from
that's what I'm saying. Yes, because like I'm happy to personally, I'm not convinced that like I don't know. I honestly didn't think much about it to be honest, but I like intuitively I seem to think that it would have been more efficient without the consciousness or without the first person experience. But even if you could convince me, oh well, it is more efficient with a first person experience,
Well,
then I still like I haven't you haven't with me, because the main problem is still there for me, at least, to understand how this is supposed to be. Sorry, go ahead.
So I guess the idea is that animals, like I think that, I can't remember who it is, but there's a philosopher that says that animals are beast machines. Yeah, that they're kind of like roam around and they react to things, and that they're not aware of what they're doing or whatever.
Descartes used to argue that. Yeah,
Descartes. I think it is Descartes actually. And I bring him up pretty much every time I'm on, but Anil Seth, who's currently studying the neuroscience of consciousness, says that we're beast machines as well. And the reason that, like, for instance, computers don't have those reactions yet is, one, because they don't have the processing power in order to have them, because we have considerable processing power in our minds.
I don't.
Most of us have considerable processing powers in our minds, but the other thing about it is that it's almost like, so what we perceive and our experience is not an accurate representation of reality, and I think that for me that's the key to this, because it bridges that gap between what we're feeling and experiencing is not actual. Not real. Yeah, so colors don't look the way that we see them. Pain is a kind of an arbitrarily unpleasant experience, and probably feels different to different people. Yeah. Smells are kind of similar, and taste, etc. So it's like there's these, we develop our responses to things, and we start to pick out stimulus, so we can see, when we look at a pen, that's a pen on the side, right? Because it resembles stimulus that we've previously seen, and we layer that over what we're actually seeing through our eyes. So it's almost like a kind of like a mixture between our preconceived ideas about what we're expecting to see and what we actually see. So it's actually not like none of this experience actually is real. It's all a kind of like a construction of reality rather than it being reality itself. And I think that that's the thing that, for me, I see people kind of not making mistakes on, because I just don't agree with them, is that I don't think consciousness is any more than a kind of an awareness that you are having an experience. And I think that awareness is accounted for through evolution, because it's more beneficial for us as a species to be able to understand what's going on in the world, so we can survive better. Because we generate that through agriculture and cities and building cities and stuff like that. Because it was better for us to be able to live in that way and be aware of things than it was to be completely unaware of things and react to things. We weren't very productive in that sense. So that's my view. I don't know if that actually explains anything about what you've said.
No, that doesn't help me at all, honestly. With my issues about
there's a comment on what you've just said, first of all, though, from Steen. He says, just because things are perceived differently by different people does not make them less real. And I think the point that was trying to be got there is, for example, if you have an extra cone in your eyes, you see thousands of extra colours. The point is the reality that we experience is not the full reality. It's our brain making sense through our various sensory perceptions. It's as real as we can perceive it to be, but we don't necessarily know the actual truth behind it all.
A really good example is face blindness. It's just a really good example, because you have people that see exactly the same stimulus, right? You see two faces very distinct from each other, right? Philip, your face is very distinct from Joe's, yeah, and there's people that have face blindness, which is a a lesion on their fusiform gyrus, and they would not be able to tell the difference between the two of you.
Even though it looks like my nose is a cock.
Even though they're saying the same, yeah, exactly. Even though they're saying the same stimulus, they just would not be able to tell the difference between the two of you.
Yeah, but like, I agree. Like, maybe I wasn't clear about this, right? Like, I agree with everything that you said about sort of how we perceive reality and how it is disjoint with what actually is going on here and the subjectivity of it all. Like, I don't have any issues with that at all. Like, that's not the problem to me. Like, it's maybe. I don't know how to put it perhaps better, but like maybe if you think about an analogy like a computer, right? Like, because oftentimes people like to use the computer analogy to explain sort of consciousness, because they say, oh, well, you have on your screen, right? You have windows, you have files, you have images and all of that, but all of that is perfectly reducible down to sort of a material layer, right? Because everything, like, technically, if you knew the physical state of everything that's going on in your machine, you would be perfectly able to reconstruct everything that's going on screen, because you have the screen, you have the CPU, you have the memory, you know everything that is going on there, so you know how it's going to look like, right? But the issue when you try to do that with the brain is, like, essentially the easiest way to think about it is you don't have a screen. Like, the best way that I can explain that is that you don't have a screen, right? Like, and you experiencing like consciousness, the way I sort of in this analogy it would work, right? Is like having this screen and living, you know, and thinking about this and visualizing stuff and all of that, right? But there is essentially in the brain there's sort of signals, electrochemical signals that do stuff, and you can have a very, very complex network of everything. But like there's like while with a computer you can say, oh well, there's the CPU, right? It's connecting to this the circuitry there, and then it emits light, and these pixels they light up in different colors, right? And then sort of they project this, and they have the structure to display this image. That's very easy to do with a computer, but it's like you have like you can't do that with consciousness, because you essentially have just the CPU and you have all the connections in there, right? But then it's sort of magically it's the case that the CPU also has like a layer of experience to it. And like I'm perfectly fine to say, like, if you want to say, oh well, that's just how it is, right? That's just like how computing or processing of information works, that it has this experience layer. That's fine by me, but then it's basically non-reducible in a sense.
I guess my view on that is that if we had a computer that had the same number of pathways, so not just the number of like, because we have trillions of neurons, right? And they are connected by dendrites to hundreds of other neurons. And that's how the pathways work, right? And that's why you get like neurotransmitters and stuff. So the pathways through the brain are so complex that you would not be able to... That I think it's essentially impossible, especially in today's day and age, to actually follow a neural pathway accurately enough to be able to understand exactly where it came from and where it's going to and all that stuff. We won't be able to do it unless we have extremely invasive procedures. And I don't even then know how you do it. So I think if we developed a computer that had the same level of processors and stuff like that in the same order as brain, with the same stuff, same kind of like level of interactivity and stuff, I think that we could simulate consciousness effectively.
I might even agree with that, but that sort of falls out of my view as well, right? Like, I think it's just is necessary that, like, maybe necessary is not the right word, but it comes as a package in a sense, right? Like with this level of how just, you know, the system assembles, that if you replicate that, like even in silicon, something like that it would have an internal experience. I do believe that, but I don't think that the explanation as to why this experience arises is going to be entirely in the circuitry or in the simulation code or whatever you want to, you know, call it. I think you're not going to be able to explain that just by appealing that there has to be some other component to bridge the divide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So if you have a computer and you don't have a monitor attached, and you're simulating a chess program, is it having an internal experience of it simulating the chess? Like, you know, when
this is what I was going to just say. I was waiting for a point to say this because no, that's fine. I mean, the visual output is essentially just, you know, the representation of the internal processing. And Steen also said something that I was going to say as well, which was that you have an internal screen, which is why people have different experiences. Now, the computer essentially has all of this stuff going on inside it, and then it outputs to this screen, and that's sort of what we have in our mind as well. Like, I mean, we can close our eyes and actually build pictures in our minds and remember things, experiences, and even cause emotional responses from thinking about stuff. So in a way, it is kind of like the computer without the screen plugged in. We just don't have the ability to plug something into our brain. Maybe we will do one day, to plug something into our brain and go, this is what I'm looking at right now. But even then, there's been those really, they weren't particularly great, but there were those MRI scans, weren't they? Where they, I don't know if it was an MRI, but they were getting people to think of a particular, was it?
I think so.
They were getting people to think of a particular object, and they got a shaded outline of the objects that they were looking at. It wasn't very detailed. It wasn't the exact same thing that they were in their mind, but it was, you know, actually, it was close. You know, it's the closest that we've got so far, and it could mean that one day we could actually have this output and put a full-on visual.
Okay, that was a bunch of averages, though. As well, output. Sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted. This actually is a perfect analogy to what I was trying to get at. Like the idea that, of course, if you unplug the screen from a computer, then the computer is still doing stuff. It's still simulating chess, right? But you wouldn't say that computer is having an experience of playing chess or something like that. And while you just said that the analogy corresponds to a brain, not like our brain is like a brain not being plugged into a screen, but then you do have, right? You do have, when you think about stuff, an experience of this stuff, while the unplugged computer does not, right? And that's basically the crux of the whole problem for me, right? That you can have sort of complex. Like, I agree, of course, that the computer is nowhere near the complexity, right? But then we can talk about if the complexity can ever really, like, just by adding complexity, if you can really bridge the gap, because I personally don't think so. But like, you can have some sort of system that processes information and that quote unquote thinks about stuff, right? And then you can have another system that thinks about stuff, but then there is a huge difference between them. And then, you know, this difference demands some sort of explanation, and that is sort of the problem, I think.
Question before you move on. Steen says, did Philip not agree with deterministic free will? And I don't think you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, but like, I don't want people to think that, like, I'm a dualist, or that I think that there is a soul, or that I think that there is some sort of, like, I'm not that sympathetic to those views. I guess, like, I'm more like panpsychism type, maybe. Like, idealism is already very crazy to me, although, like, some people that talk about it are pretty convincing. So I do think that maybe there is some sort of, like, some people, I think, call it sort of dual aspect stuff, right? That there's this dual aspect to reality, right? There is one aspect where it's like external, and then there's one aspect that it's like sort of first person. And then sort of if you combine these blocks, right, in very complex scenarios, when you build up to a sort of brain or stuff, right, you get the experience that we have. But there is this sort of distinction between these two parts that is built into, or something that is like just primitive, if you will, to everything. That might be my way of thinking about this, and I still am, like, I do believe that it's like indeterminism in a sense. It doesn't remove me from that. I don't think that there's like this magical substance that can do stuff or something like that.
But I mean, you're a hard determinist yourself, though, aren't you? You don't believe in any sort of, not even compatibilist free will.
I mean, compatibilism is an interesting thing, because I do like compatibilism is essentially arguing that you still have that's.
It's one choice, but you make it rather than you're a mindless automaton.
It's compatible with determinism in a sense.
It's not libertarian free will. It's talking about free will. Yeah.
I am. I think I could call myself a compatibilist under certain circumstances, because I do think that certain considerations in moral realms and all of that still maintain even under determinism. But I genuinely haven't read a lot about it, so I'm very unsure about it yet.
Sorry, I missed that.
Shut up. So then I suppose Steen wasn't too far off with sort of where you might be, but you're still probably more in the hard determinist camp, but you're sympathetic to compatibilism.
Yeah. I think I'm more sort of careful about it, just because I don't know that much about it, and I don't want to make even on philosophy of mind. Like, I'm arguing here with you now, but I'm very sort of careful about it all. Like, I don't know much about sort of illusionism or other sort of reductionist views that are actually seem very interesting. I've listened to a few things on there as well, but it's just that at the moment I have a hard time sort of seeing how that fits in a way. And so at the moment I just tend to prefer the non-reductionist views.
To be honest, Philip, I didn't realise we were arguing. I'm really sorry. As an atheist, I should meme bomb you and say, prove it.
You should have done that. Yeah.
It's your burden of proof. You made the claim.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. So, Dave, I'm sorry we sidetracked your dialogue. You've been sitting there patiently waiting to continue.
It's all good. The conversation was interesting. So, okay. So, like Philip said, there's some interesting stuff that goes on when we talk about what an actual explanation is. So we could say something like, how did the ball get on the table? Or how did the cup get on the table? And you could say, well, so-and-so put that on the table. And that's sort of an explanation, isn't it? Because it describes how it got there.
Could you then sort of do the physics of it all?
That's it. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper. And when we're looking for a proper explanation, we're not just looking for this sort of efficient cause. We're not just looking for so-and-so threw the ball to so-and-so. What made the ball rise? What made the ball fall? What made it slow down as it got further? These are all explanations.
But not exactly what you're talking about. So even if you were to say, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, it's not a full explanation in that regard.
It's not a proper explanation, no. So if you say, well, this kind of inner experience that we have just comes along with brain states, that's sort of an explanation, but it's not an actual proper explanation. It doesn't tell us why these inner experiences come along with these brain states. Okay, so I'm sorry, I've got to check my notes because I haven't really gone in depth into all this stuff. So, an explanations are forms of argument that aim to show that the explanandum, whatever is to be explained, is to be expected in the light of the explanans, the statements doing the explaining. What's so funny?
Funny words.
Well, we
explanandum, explanans.
Yeah, it's what they're called. So Carl Hempel in 1965 came along with the deductive nomological model. So when we want to explain some event E, we construct an argument that includes among its premises a statement of law. And it includes in its premises a description of specific conditions that obtain in some spatio-temporal region. So, like water boiling at 100 degrees Celsius happens because of such and such a law. And the premises jointly entail a statement to the effect that E occurred. So we can talk about kinetic energy, we can talk about the conditions that the water is in and how the heat rose, and we can give actual proper physical descriptions of these things. What's so funny?
Just laughing at Steen in the chat. He just pointed out that you turned the two of us into 6-year-olds because we were just giggling at the words.
Explanans.
I am listening, honest.
Okay. So the premises that are doing the explaining entail the actual conclusion of what we're trying to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So if we say something like brain states give rise to inner states, that doesn't really explain it. It just says, well, your brain changes, so therefore your inner experience changes. And this is sort of kind of what Philip's getting at here when he says he finds it hard to understand, is that if you look at all these physical facts and say that there's this arrangement of matter, or say pain, you can have the firing of the C fibers, the activations in the nerves, the neurocortex lighting up. That can tell somebody that they're in pain, or that can give cause to this pain. But just those specific things don't actually give any reason to indicate or believe that there is something actually going on internally. Is that roughly what you're saying, Philip?
Yeah. That is a very good way to put it. I think I don't want to start another tangent.
Oh, no, don't worry.
Maybe we can get back to this at some point. Is sort of like a Mary's room type argument as well that could work. Just putting it here. And then
we're going to be bringing that up. I was hoping to bring that up later, along with
it's on the list for tonight.
Zombies.
I know we've covered them off before, but they're relevant to this, aren't they, Dave?
Yeah, they are. So Hempel argues that an explanation is sort of like a deductive argument. So we can work out what is going to happen based on the premises. And in the case of the mind, it seems to be that we can't work out what's going to happen as an inner experience just from looking at these physical facts.
The Placid demon can.
Who?
The Placid demon.
Yeah.
Can he?
I am convinced, yes.
You had no choice but to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sorry, Dave, if I interrupted.
That's all right. So the same can happen for statistical laws. We can sort of plug in a bunch of statistics and we can understand the laws, and we can say that so-and-so is probably going to happen 80% of the time according to these laws and these statistics. So that can be called an explanation as well. But one of the problems here then is that if we go for only the high probability and we explain the high probability, there's still this 20%. Is that an explanation for why it didn't happen? So there seems to be this asymmetry between the two. So Hempel's arguments, they kind of work, but there seems to be something missing to them. But Michael Friedman and Philip Kitcher, sorry, I can't remember the names, they come up with the idea of the unification theory. So one thing that's missing from Hempel's version is that, yes, we can explain these happenings with relative reliability, We can make predictions from these explanations. But the one things these explanations don't give us are understanding. They just give us this sort of functional, robotic-like explanation that X is going to happen, but it doesn't really explain why. So Kitcher and Friedman argue that we need more than just this kind of explanation. We need an explanation that at an ontological level, at a sort of functional level. We need to be able to explain the mechanisms by which something happens. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because by having this explanation of how something can arise, we have a better understanding of why something might happen.
Yeah.
And the thing, we also have to take into account Hempel's. So this is why they call it the unification theory. It's both an ontic and an epistemic explanation. Sorry, but go on.
Sorry, I'm just sorting my mic, so my chair's not. Is that better?
Yeah. Oh, and I can still hear it, but it's better.
Sorry. Apologies.
It's all right. So for the unified theory as well, you can kind of say that there might be this asymmetry, because you still have this problem with the high probability, low probability. But you're not actually kind of counting on the high probability one to be the explanation. The low probability one can be also an explanation because that explains why it didn't happen. And Kitcher and Friedman, they sort of argue that one way of getting around this thing and sorting out good and bad arguments is that you can unify these explanations from simpler ones to more specific ones. And if the more specific ones fall in line with the simpler ones and with other simpler ones, and you build up this bigger picture, if they all fit, then we have a reasonably good explanation. Does that make sense? So we can sort of sort that out through that. Okay, so there's also the pragmatist arguments. An explanation is just whatever works for somebody, which to me doesn't seem to be a particularly good, if people can understand how consciousness arises from creation, then they have an explanation for creation, which to me doesn't actually seem to be a particularly good way of understanding explanations.
So, I mean, the pragmatists there, it seems akin to the pragmatic theory of truth.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
Which is popular in America, isn't it?
Yeah. Like Dewey and people like that. So one other way to look at these things is that we can say we have this explanation for this particular mechanism, but it doesn't really explain everything. So a proper explanation would be the ideal explanatory text, some explanation that explains everything in every detail, sort of like a unified theory type thing. But that might not necessarily be the case, because it could be impossible to get to this ideal explanatory text if you think of something like the phenomenal and pneumological from Kant, where we only have access to the phenomenological, and we can never have access to reality how it actually is. So an explanation is just something that needs to fill in some gap in the ideal explanatory text. So if we can actually fill in some of these gaps and they work and they fit in with the other theories that we have, then we have some kind of explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So these sort of describe laws and regularities and events and how explanations for them. But there is another type. That's the explanation for the instantiation of properties, which is sort of what we're looking at when we're discussing consciousness. We're not looking at an event or a regularity. We're looking at how to explain a particular property that kind of resides within us. And this generally comes from psychology. So when we look for how memory works, we're not looking for a particular mechanism as such, but how the property of memory comes about within us and how it functions and how it arises. So it's not just how do we explain this event or this pattern, it's how is this object able to do this? So it's not just state transitions, it's, a realization theory that we need. So that's the question. Can physicalism explain this realization of consciousness?
No.
And that's the sort of explanation that we're looking for, yeah. So what is a good explanation for consciousness? It is the actual explanation that gives rise to how this property exists within us.
Yeah. I mean, that's even probably more complicated than even hypothesizing its purpose. Because I think we can all have a very good idea of different purposes experience can give us.
Yeah, that's it. So if you come up with an answer that evolution is easier on us, it makes it easier for our survival if we have these inner experiences. You've given an explanation, but you've not given an explanation that bridges that explanatory gap between the physical and the mental.
But then there isn't one, is there?
People like Papineau would argue that there isn't.
It didn't work.
There isn't one.
Sorry, did I?
No, there's just a mosquito here. That's why I'm looking around constantly trying because I haven't slept tonight because of that.
Oh, nightmare.
Yeah, so I was like very excited when it landed here, but I didn't. So, sorry.
So yeah, people like David Papineau argue that there is no actual explanatory gap. Like I mentioned earlier about the intuition of distinctness, that there seems to be this distinction between the phenomenological and the brain states. This is only because of how we experience it. It's these mental states that we have are just the realization of brain states. They're just realized by brain states. So there is no explanatory gap. I mean, I'll go deeper into it, but that's the core.
Didn't you say Dennett as well said that he doesn't believe in qualia?
Yeah, not in the sense that there are properties in objects out there that we realize internally. So when we see the color red, red isn't something that is within an object. It's within our mind and within our visual cortex and things like that.
I mean, I can kind of understand that. I don't necessarily. I think there is such a thing as red. It's just not what we perceive. That's like my view on it. It's different. It's different to our perception of red. If we were to see the true red, that would be I don't think we could. Not in the same way that we do at the moment. But I guess because I totally understand where Philip's coming from, and I think that saying there's no explanatory gap is a bit of a cop out, because I agree that it is our brain states kind of acting and becoming qualia or becoming experiences, right? But then how that happens, or the way in which that does happen does require an explanation, because there's no even on a functional level, how does our visual cortex transfer that information into an experience of sight, right? That's still not explained. Right, and
Yeah.
I think that's what you were saying earlier, Philip, and I totally agree with you.
That is
Right.
exactly what it was.
And I think that that's fair. That's totally fair, and I think that that's totally does need an explanation. But I guess my thing is I'm not convinced that it's anything but a brain state, and it's just the way that our brain does it. But I just don't know how that happens. I don't think we know how that happens yet, and that's being looked into. So yeah, I don't agree that there's not an explanatory gap. I think there is. I just think that a lot of the explanations that people give is a load of rubbish.
Okay, well, the explanatory gap, according to some, is that our theory is just underdetermined. We just do not have all the facts yet. And we're still filling in this ideal explanatory theory. And we might be piecing it together piece by piece, but because all these pieces missing, and because we have this intuition of distinctness, this causes us to think that there's an explanatory gap, where it's not an explanatory gap from how do brain states realize these, and there seems to be no way to explain how our brain states realize these mental states. The explanatory gap is just missing information.
Right.
Yeah, that's something that I've seen a lot. That it's just not, we don't have all the information that is required to sort of see how this fits all together. And I mean, that's possible. That's always possible. I don't want to shut it down.
Yeah, I think that's probably my view.
I'm still open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably my view. It's just that we don't understand. I think the brain is one of the least understood. So there's this thing in psychology called lateralization of brain function, which is essentially where you try to map the functions of the brain to certain areas of the brain, right? And it started out with phrenology, which is the skulls. I don't know if you've seen those
feeling
skulls
around the bumps and
feeling around the bumps, and they had really good skull testers that told you exactly where the bumps were in your skull, but didn't tell you anything about your character. And it's essentially adapted from there, where we have like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, which are the language centers in the left hemisphere of the brain, in the temporal lobe. We have the frontal lobe, which is about kind of more about like sympathy and empathy with others, and like rational thought and stuff like that. And this all comes about through testing people who have had lesions or like brain damage, right? And also through fMRI scans. And lesions are notoriously rubbish because they don't just lesion the area that you want lesioned, right? They if you're going to have brain damage, you're going to have it across an excessive area, and it could be that the area that you think is actually damaged is, or the area you think is where that brain function comes from is actually somewhere else or linked. It's just the pathways between the brain. So there's a guy that did a study on language, for instance. And previously we thought it was just this language center over here, but then he did lots of fMRI scans, and he found that language is across the entire brain. It's just it's the pathways go everywhere, and it's just that the center is here. So you when you're thinking about language and you're thinking about like talking about objects, you'll go to like sensory motor area, you go to the occipital area in order to explain what you're seeing and stuff like that. So it's so complex. I don't think we're even touching the surface of what the brain does, how it functions, what areas do what. I think we have no idea, essentially, and we're kind of at the point where we were like 500 years ago with physics and maths.
Yeah,
I think so. I just don't think we have the tools or the technology in order to make any claims about how the brain transfers its electrochemical signals into experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was a really long-winded explanation. Sorry.
No, that's for like philosophy and all that. 4-page kind of argument for why a table doesn't actually exist.
God.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the ways that kind of is argued for this idea that mental states can't be realized by brain states as such, there must be over and above, is this idea of the P-zombie. in that we can conceive of a being just like us, having all the same physical attributes, having all the same pathways. There's some possible world where there exists a being just like us in every way, except it doesn't have inner states. It just behaves like a computational robot with an AI, and it just responds to external stimuli. But it just doesn't have, so when it listens to music, it might dance, but it doesn't have that feeling that you get when you hear music and you dance. And that's basically how, God, I can't remember his name, Keith Levine. But as Levine lays out, I've written it down here. For a physicalist materialist theory to explain consciousness, it would have to be inconceivable that the facts of consciousness could vary independently of the facts cited in the theory. The former would have to be epistemologically necessitated by the latter. Premise 2, whatever physical theory is proposed, it will always be conceivable that the facts of consciousness could vary independently of the physical facts cited in the theory. Therefore, no physicalist theory can explain consciousness. Bringing us back to the P-zombie.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the P-zombie, though, just because we can conceive of it, equally, if it was exactly the same as us, but just didn't have the experience, I mean, I actually think that's actually quite hard to conceive. I can separate it, but it's if they were exactly the same as us, I can't imagine anyone out there who is exactly the same as us and does not experience their life, not without some form of brain damage. So, how can the P-zombie even be a reality? Just because we can conceive of it, how can it actually be a reality?
Well, that's Daniel Dennett's argument, the Zimbo argument. So when it comes to the P-zombie, we're actually filled with these cultural things that make zombies seem more conceivable than they actually are, because when we hear the word zombie, our brain isn't necessarily thinking of this conception that's given to us by Chalmers. It's also including all these other ideas, like mainstream movies, books, the Haitian zombies, where they use drugs to just melt the mind and people just follow commands. So for something to be conceivable, it has to be logically coherent. And what Dennett argues is that when we conceive of a zombie, we're not actually conceiving of something logically coherent. Because if we were to take an exact copy of you and say it had no inner states, then it wouldn't be an exact copy of you.
Yep.
And if you,
okay, I have a bunch of things to say to
okay,
a lot of stuff. So I don't know if this is the right moment. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to say about people who say, oh, maybe it's just that this gap exists because we have a huge gap in our knowledge or something like that, right? And that's why we can't see the whole picture. First of all, I'm not unsympathetic to that answer, but I think there are some things to consider here as well, right? Because first of all, and this is a next step, and it took me a while to see this, but I think it's very hard to understand, even in principle, how any sort of neurological explanation could bridge this gap, right? And this is not the same as with other problems that we have, like from non-life to life, where we also don't understand how it works. We don't understand how it is supposed to go, right? But no, there is no hard problem of life in a sense.
No,
right?
no.
Because it's very easy. Yeah, there used to be. That's true. There used to be, but that was I think Emerson had a great point on this. I don't remember exactly how he worded it, so I'm probably not gonna speak on his behalf. But he had a great conversation, I think, with I don't remember anymore. But I'm gonna link the video at some point. That was a different sort of problem. The whole animist, I think, I don't know how that was called. Anyway, sorry, I'm deviating. What I'm saying here is that there is no difficulty in sort of picturing a bridge between sort of non-life and life. Like you don't know how it's supposed to work. We have been working on this problem for a while now. We still don't have a solution, but there's no reason to be skeptical about that, because there is like everything that is like all the building blocks that are needed to sort of bridge the gap are sort of there, because you're on one side of the divide in a sense, right? But the problem with the hard problem of consciousness, to me at least, is that no matter how complex you and how well you understand a network of synapses, right? Like you can understand how well they work, when they trigger everything, and you can understand, like maybe now we just understand a small portion of them and how they behave, but in the future we'll understand all of them and how they behave. But there's still going to be synapses, and I don't think that by sort of removing the mystery from how synapses interact, there is a possibility there to sort of understand how sort of a chemical reaction in some synapse network gives rise to this sort of screen of experience. So like, and it's more than like, it's hard to put into words, but it's more than just, sort of, oh, I don't understand how it works, therefore there is no solution to this, because as I said, like there might be, but it's like almost a systemic sort of thing, right? Where it almost seems like a category error in a sense, right? Because just looking at all these synapses, even if you understand a lot of them, and even if you understand all of them, like almost Mary's room in a sense, there seems to be sort of a shift there, a very problematic shift for your explanation. Okay, and that was sort of the thing that I wanted to point out. And yeah, and when it comes to P-zombies, actually, I don't think, first of all, I don't think that it's a problem. Like even if P-zombies, actually, no, let me rephrase that. I think that the P-zombie experiment works still, because we do understand this differentiation, and we do know that it can be done to a certain extent when we look at computing devices, right? Like, or very complex neural networks or stuff like that, right? When you see that and you sort of see how they work and how they operate, they seem to sort of relate, at least partially, to how sort of a brain would work. Not exactly, not a one-on-one match, of course, but there is some similarity. There are some similarities in terms of information processing, especially with more advanced neural networks and that. And there seems to be a problem there, because if you're willing to say that one doesn't have this experience, then there is tension. Because on one side you clearly do have this experience, and on the other you don't. So that's why I'm suspicious of just dismissing the thing because it's not possible or something like that. Because like the very point of the P-zombie experiment to me seems to be that, you say, well, this is explainable just by the synapses interacting, right? So here you have a meat body with synapses interacting, right? And it seems to be perfectly plausible to say that this is just a meat body with synapses interacting, because that's your explanation of how consciousness arises, right? But why would you want to add something to that? At least, yeah. And by add something to that, I mean, introduce consciousness, unless that was necessarily part of the package in a way.
I think
I'm done.
Go on, Luke.
Yes. There is current research going on that is looking into that kind of stuff, and I guess you got people, there's neuroscientists that are currently looking into quantum aspects of consciousness to try and explain it and explain how it rises. I've had multiple notifications for apparent research that's happened recently where they're like, we can explain consciousness through quantum mechanics, and I haven't read it, so I don't know anything about it, but maybe that's something I should read. at some point. But I guess the current research at the moment is kind of trying to bridge that gap to a certain extent by doing neurophenomenological studies. So looking at the pathways and stuff while someone is experiencing something simultaneously in VR in order to understand perception and how it relates to neurons. And I know that that's not necessarily kind of going to answer that question, but I think that it's going to be something that kind of starts to tighten that gap up to the point where we're going to have an explanation at some point, because we're starting to see it not just from one side. We're not just looking at consciousness and we're not just looking at the brain. We're looking at them simultaneously and trying to see, okay, this is the neuro aspect of it, and this is the phenomenological aspect of it. What's happening here, and then how do we do it? And it's really interesting, actually. Like, I think one of the key things that Set has looked at is visual illusions and auditory illusions and stuff like that, because that shows you the gaps in perception and shows you how the brain kind of processes that information and then transfers it into some sort of experience, but it doesn't explain why we have the experience in the first place. Yeah. So that's where we're kind of getting to a point. We're getting to a point where we're starting to understand, actually, this is just all like kind of a controlled hallucination, because you can listen to a piece of stimulus that you don't understand, like a whistle. It sounds like a whistle. And you can hear a piece of audio, like someone speaking, and then you can listen to the whistle again, and then you can hear the voice in that whistle, so you understand what they're saying. Mm-hmm. Which is like, it's the same stimulus. It's just you have new information and your brain processes it differently. And I think that shows you how your brain kind of goes, okay, well, this is a stimulus I don't recognize. It means nothing. And then as soon as there's another layer to it, you suddenly, your brain creates meaning in that same stimulus. Which is really bizarre when you engage in that kind of experience, and then you realize, actually, all this stuff that's around me that I'm seeing and I'm recognizing isn't necessarily exactly what I'm seeing. It's my brain making sense of what I'm seeing, layered over the actual stimulus itself. And I guess, I'm not saying that I totally see where you're coming from. I can see why you're kind of pessimistic around that happening in the future. I think that I see the problem of life from no life. That was a big problem that people had back in the day. I think there was like something like a life force that they were talking about. They thought there had to be some sort of force. And I think that for me, the panpsychism version of consciousness, or the idealism version of consciousness, is that life force that we now no longer need as an explanation for life. That's what that is to me. And I think that it's, I think for me, it's kind of an analogy for consciousness current in the modern day. We introduce this kind of concept of, life must need this force in order to exist, and now we realize, actually, it's a natural process that ended up resulting in life happening. We can explain that pretty well. So for me, it's a very good analogy for consciousness. It's just that I don't think we're at a point where we can have that explanation yet, and I don't know when we will be. But that's my view of it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Dave, Icarus says, is the hard problem of consciousness just an argument from incredulity?
I wouldn't think so, but it's possible. It's just that we don't understand it, so therefore it's not possible to understand. But there does actually seem to be this gap between function and realization. So going back to there is no explanation for why it is like it is, or why it's there. If we think about something like water, and this is something that David Papineau argues, if we think about something like water, we can reduce that down to H2O, and all the physical explanations can give us why kinetic energy makes it break apart at a certain level, and why it flows like liquid, and why it's an odorless, tasteless kind of liquid. The physical explanations can give us all that. But when we ask a question like, well, why is it water? It doesn't really make any sense. What makes it water? It's our pre-theoretical sort of experience of it. We have this experience of this water as this tasteless, odorless liquid, and we break it down, but we don't really ask ourselves, well, why is this water and not that water? Because of how we conceive of it in our experience, and then we go on to study it and we break it down and we come up with all these physical facts for what it is. We don't ask, why does it arise in this way? It's just, that's how it is.
So, is that, are you saying that that we should treat consciousness the same?
That's kind of what he thinks, yeah.
Right, okay. So essentially, you know, we don't ask that question about water. We don't ask why it is water. So even though we can break it down to its physical form, it doesn't. We don't ask that question of water. So why should we ask that question about consciousness?
Yeah.
It's something that is.
It just is.
I mean, I disagree. I think that there's a big difference between, and this is just my view, I guess, but there's a big difference between personal, real experience of stuff that is, you know, and kind of water.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like an oversimplification, really.
I guess it's an analogy, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah,
it's an analogy. But there's something mysterious about consciousness, isn't there? There is something mysterious about it. I don't think water's got mystery around it. We just.
Although it's weird, it doesn't act like other liquids do necessarily. It's one of the few that expands as it freezes, whereas everything else that freezes tends to get smaller, doesn't it? So there's other weird properties of water. It's one of those things that water's actually quite weird.
Why does it clean things? That's what I've always been confused about. Why does it clean things?
Because wet is clean.
Not if you're covered in Coca-Cola.
I just don't understand why it cleans things. It doesn't make any sense.
So
Okay.
Steen, sorry, just before we move on, Steen says, oh, I clicked the wrong one. He says, here is something. We describe it to the nth degree and those become the characteristics of what it is. So essentially, he's talking about, he's going on to say, yeah, you know, surface tension, osmosis, and all the other properties that you might have for water. But that's describing all the physical facts of water. And the other thing as well that we could say about water is, you know, how the universe evolved through cause and effect, and through the various chemical reactions that gave rise to water, and that's sort of how it got here. And I'd say for something like water, that's more than enough of an explanation for something. Whereas,
sorry, he was saying surface tension is why it cleans.
Okay. Fair. I figured he was just talking about different properties of the water, so I was just carrying on with that. But I mean, it's true though that you do describe it. There's different properties of water. You know, its freezing and boiling point, the way it turns into steam, and everything. So, yeah. So in that regard, you've got all the physical properties of water, and I think for something that is like water that doesn't have something more, like the qualia of experience, it is enough to say water is what it is, and I don't think that it's enough to say the same for consciousness.
I sort of agree. But it's more just a basic thing. So we don't sort of ask why a rock is a rock. Well, why is the universe formed in such a way that the rock is this thing, or these rocks come about in this way? We just accept that the rocks and that the physical facts explain them. So there's certain properties that we ask of consciousness that we don't ask of other things that may be similar. So the realization of consciousness may just be like the realization of water, where it just comes about as it is. And asking why... Sorry.
No, I was just going to say this is the panel sets the real problem of consciousness. Is explaining the stuff around the easy problem, which is the soft problem, which is the stuff
How
around how the physical stuff works, and not worrying too much about whilst also being aware that there is experiences that go on without being too worried about how those experiences come about through the easy problem. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
It describes that as a real problem of consciousness, which is, I think that there is that will lead to
solving the whole problem.
Yeah, I think so, personally, but...
So another kind of analogy that Papineau uses is Samuel Clemens and... Oh, what's his other name? What's his writing name?
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah. No. Tom...
Jump.
No, I can't remember his name now, but I should know this.
Arto.
He wrote Huckleberry Finn?
Arto.
No.
I know who you're talking about now. And now I can't remember. I had no clue until you said Huckleberry Finn.
Mark Twain.
That's it.
Yeah. Shania's dad, isn't it?
Yeah. So Samuel Clemens just is Mark Twain. That's his pen name.
Oh.
But we can imagine two groups, one studying Samuel Clemens and one studying Mark Twain. Now, we can both imagine them studying these people entirely separately, never coming across each other, and then coming to this sort of convention where these two groups kind of interact with each other. And they slowly come to the realization that they're actually studying the same person. Now, once they realize that these two people are the same people, the mystery kind of disappears. Well, why are they two people? Well, they're not just one and the same. So if we come to realize that consciousness is just the realization of brain states, then it could be that this mystery of the hard problem sort of disappears.
Right.
In the same way that if we realize that when we talk about pain, we're just talking about these C fibers firing in these neurons, or when we see red, we see light waves functioning at such and such a frequency within our brain, and the brain state realizes this inner experience, then the mystery of the hard consciousness disappears. The mystery of the hard problem disappears. It doesn't work for me, but this is sort of the argument.
Philip doesn't look convinced.
He hasn't looked convinced the whole argument. Nope.
Every time I talk, he's like rolling his eyes. Just kidding, you're not.
It's a hard one. It's a hard one because there is, as David Papineau says, there is this intuition of distinctness. There seems to be this phenomenological property, as Mary's Room explains. There is phenomenological properties that exist over and above the physical properties.
Mm.
So when we see red for the first time, we learn something new.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at all the physical facts, won't tell us what it feels like to see red. It'll just tell us that we see red.
I think that we should cover off this, just go into it just for people who haven't heard it. But I think what we need to do quickly though is I need a refill. My throat is very dry. Does anyone need a quick break as well before we continue? Yeah, all right. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, and I'll catch you guys in a bit.
Yeah. I've got a bunch of papers that I should put up though.
Yes, I would love that. Yes. By the way, I actually have I found the response that was eluding me about vitalism, right? The idea that we need this sort of special force to explain, life from non-life. Like there is a good
vitalism,
that's what Luke was talking about earlier. I actually now figured out what the thing was.
It's called what's he call it?
Vitalism?
No, it's got like a French.
Elan Vital or something like that.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah, but the problem with that is essentially the following, right? Like the analogy doesn't work in my opinion, because with Elan Vital, right, they were trying to explain. Like, you were observing certain sort of physical phenomena, right, in systems, like the ability to reproduce and all of that, and you're like, oh no, this can never be explained by physical things, right? And therefore we need this mysterious force. But like with the consciousness thing, yeah.
So we're back in the room. Sorry about that brief interlude. Call of the nature, and I needed a drink. So Dave,
me wanting to play Philip. Not what it looks like.
I just wanted to quickly, I guess, comment on the whole idea of vitalism and Elan Vital and all that was brought up earlier about, like, as an analogy to the hard problem of consciousness, right? Like there was once this movement where people thought that sort of like stuff in living organisms, like reproduction, like other things, could not be explained by just merely chemistry and other physical systems, because this was allegedly too complex or something, and therefore they postulated this mysterious force called Elan Vital or something like that to explain that. They said this is sort of the explanation as to why this is happening. But like that doesn't work really well as an analogy, in my opinion, because, and this is actually the point Emerson I credit, like this is his sort of way of thinking about this. It's not really that, like with consciousness, with the problem of consciousness, right? You're not postulating the mysterious thing. The mysterious thing is already there, right? You're already experiencing it. That is consciousness. So you're not sort of bringing up this mysterious thing to explain it, to explain some data that you're observing, right? That the thing that is mysterious, the thing that needs to be explained is the consciousness, right? So it's like the reverse of that, right? Because you're not saying, oh, there must be this mysterious thing. Right? This mysterious thing already exists. You experience it, right? Like you might say it's an illusion. You might say many things about it, right? But that you're experiencing it is pretty much, one of the few things that you maybe can say for certain. So that's sort of the distinction there. It's not like you're observing something and then postulating a mysterious thing. The mysterious thing is there. You cannot deny it, or at least it's hard to deny it, and therefore you're sort of trying to figure out how it's supposed to work.
But isn't that the same thing as life? Because life exists. We experience life. We observe life, and the whole life force thing was an explanation for why life happens, right? The vitalism thing is an explanation for why there is life, and consciousness and panpsychism and souls and stuff like that is an explanation for why consciousness exists, and why it's not just brain states.
Yeah, sure, but like with, I suppose what you're saying, it's not really like there were certain things about sort of how living things work and how they behave that was driving this idea that there needs to be this mysterious thing, right? And then also this mysterious thing is that it wasn't really an explanation, really, right? Like it was doing nothing to remove the mystery. It was merely just postulating that there must be this other thing.
But they thought they were removing the mystery. I guess this is because I think I view vitalism and panpsychism as similar things, because panpsychism
they're like completely different in my eyes, right? Because there's nothing about vitalism necessarily that in terms of like the things that you're observing, right? They're not themselves, I guess, how do I put it, right? Like you're having some mystery there, and then you're throwing something else to patch it up that is, again, something that is mysterious, right? With panpsychism, that's not really the case, right? You have something that is mysterious, as consciousness might be, right? But then the thing that you're throwing to explain that is not another different force or soul or something that you cannot conceptualize or something like that, right? It's
But you're saying
adding something to the base of your ontology.
So please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know much about panpsychism. But
sorry.
So,
yeah.
Get that mosquito though. Get him.
Yeah.
Or her. Or they. But so vitalism was life was mysterious, and so they thought about this potential life force that developed life from non-life, right? That's what vitalism is at its very most basic form, right?
Yeah.
And then we found out that life developing isn't as mysterious as we thought it was. It's very possible that life can develop from non-life quite simply, actually. And then we have consciousness, which is mysterious, and so panpsychism is that there's an underlying. I don't want to get this wrong. It's not that everything is conscious, but everything has the potential to be conscious. There's an underlying conscious
something along those
within
lines.
all particles.
Something.
Is that not the same thing? If we remove the mystery from consciousness at some point in the future, does that not become the same thing?
Yeah, of course. Like if that happens, then it's going to be it's at least partially an analogous sort of thing, but it's still not perfectly mappable to the thing, because, as I said, right, like the thing that was observed, it was not mysterious in itself, right? It was mysterious how it came about, and therefore you put this other thing down, right? But consciousness in itself is already a thing that cannot be that is the thing that is the problem, right? And it's not like you can question whether or not it exists, I guess, or not, or at least not that you're experiencing something. So then the question becomes, well, how do you explain it, right? And then of course there's the reasoning why you cannot explain it just by looking at brain states or looking at the physical state of the brain, and we've went through some of those already. Like I don't know if that was satisfactory, but like I may have messed it up a bit. I don't know, but
I see. No, I think I can see the difference in the analogy. I just think that it's because of the position that we're in. I think hindsight gives us a lot of kind of like understanding of what life is, and we us for understand that life can come from non-life quite easily. It's not mysterious at all. Like, but there are still people that think that there has to be a life force, a soul, or something in order for life to exist. I do think that we're at the point of consciousness where it remains mysterious, and that there's almost like there has to be another element to it. And I think that Psychism adds that element to it. That's saying that all particles have the potential to be conscious, and that there's an underlying conscious. I don't know how to describe it, energy or something within all particles.
Yeah, it's
proto consciousness that exists as a kind of property of the universe, and and exists within all fundamental forces.
So then that would suggest that the universe was always at some point going to become conscious in some way. There was always going to be a being that was conscious, right? Because if it's an underlying force, an underlying element, or
no, I mean it depends on how you look at it, right? Like it depends on what you mean by consciousness, because as you said at some point, right, that sort of being aware of the experience that you're having, that you see as a consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's not really sort of a prediction that would necessarily happen in panpsychism. I don't think so, right? You would still need evolution, all of that. Right? Like if you look at sort of integrated information theory, which is actually something that some neuroscientists came up with it, and sort of then it implied panpsychism, as sort of the calculations were shown to imply panpsychism at some point. And then essentially, if I understood him correctly, right, like his prediction would be that wherever you get the maximum amount of, I think it's phi, it's the letter that he uses to calculate, then this sort of consciousness that you want to talk about would appear, something like that. But then again, like I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't think I'm qualified. And I think we should have Emerson on at some point, because he's definitely much more well-versed in this. And will.
Yeah, I get that. I guess it's just, for me, it's almost like a Occam's razor type deal for me. It adds an element that isn't necessary to the
but I see it like, that's true. But like, I guess the point is of panpsychism and other non-reductive explanations. Of course, if you could have a reductive explanation, that would be ideal, right? Because then you would have just one thing, and then you wouldn't have to postulate additional things, right? But I think depending on how you see this whole scenario, right? If you think that it's near impossible for there to be, like, for it to be explained given what we assume about materialism and stuff, right? Then an extra thing in your ontology is not, like, it's justified, right? Like Occam's razor only works if you have equal explanatory power on both things. Then you can say, oh, well, I'm going to shave unnecessary stuff and I'm going to pick the simpler theory. But if one theory actually explains stuff more than the other, then that's sort of, you cannot really use that simplicity. I mean, you could use that as a benefit on one side, right? But it definitely pays to have this other theory if it has more explanatory power, even if it's a bit more complex.
So sorry, not to shit on panpsychism.
No, don't.
The way I see it, I think for me it feels a bit like how energy is described by a lot of people, in that it's so I think a lot of people misunderstand what energy is, for instance, because in physics energy is purely the ability for something to do work. That's what it is. So it's the ability for something to move, or to get hot, or to get cold, or anything like that. That requires energy, but people think energy is something. And that's how I feel about consciousness, and specifically from what I've read about panpsychism. And again, I'm with you on that, Philip. I'm not an expert. I haven't done extensive reading or watching or anything, but from what I've seen and have read, it seems to kind of take consciousness as we know it and then transfer it into a separate thing that has a bit more kind of like a few more properties to it than the consciousness that is described in other conversations. If that makes sense, a bit like how people take energy. And
I actually think of it as the opposite. Actually, it doesn't, like the way I think about sort of panpsychism and consciousness as pictured in panpsychism is merely like sort of a perspective. So it's actually even simpler than what you would sort of usually intend by consciousness. And you could talk about consciousness also in different ways, right? Because even if you're not aware that you're experiencing something, right? If you're experiencing something, that also is in some way consciousness, right? Like that you're able to experience something even if you're not aware of it. Like for instance, if you're dreaming something, right? You're experiencing something, right? And then you sort of, when you wake up, you forget about it and you go about your day. But then when you actually remember, oh, actually I had this dream, right? You're remembering an experience that you've had. So you actually were experiencing something. You just are not conscious that you were experiencing something, but that actually you are experiencing something. I think that is also a level of consciousness. Actually, some people like to distinguish between meta consciousness and consciousness to draw this distinction. But like, I don't know how you want to call it. It doesn't matter. But I do think there is this other relevant aspect of it about sort of experiencing something and but not being aware of the fact that you're experiencing something.
I'm gonna have to think about that. I need to process that information.
Yeah. As much as I love these conversations, I often find that I get so lost in thoughts that come off of, I'm listening to you guys talk, and all of a sudden they inspire a different thought, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about so many different things, and I come back in, and you're talking about something else. And I'm like, shit. Yeah, I will say, at the moment, I sort of see how the arguments can be very similar between panpsychism and vitalism. I'm not saying that necessarily makes them right, to compare them the same, but it does seem to me like we could be in a place where we just don't know enough, and if we just don't know enough, we might be looking back 500 years in time and going, laughing at the idea that there was this additional part of the explanation, or it might be the other way around. We might actually go.
Yeah, that's always possible. That's of course always. But like, I'm not discarding the possibility, as I said before. I just think it's highly unlikely that it's going to be the case. At least highly unlikely might be an overstatement, but unlikely that's going to be the case.
Yeah. But let's I mean, I know we're still on topic, but let's get back onto what we were going to discuss just before the break. And Dave was moving on to basically Mary's room. And I know we've discussed Mary's room in depth, but Dave, can you just give us a quick overview of Mary's room for anyone that hasn't heard it before? And obviously, I would suggest that anyone who wants to know more about Mary's room to check out the video that we did on Mary's room probably almost 6 months ago. It's in the SciPhi playlist on our YouTube account. But Dave, can you just give us a quick overview?
Yeah. Mary's room thought experiment comes from Frank Jackson in his, I think it's a 1982 paper, Epiphenomenal Qualia. And it's this, if we imagine a scientist who exists in a black and white room, and she has black and white TV, and everything about her life is black and white, and everybody she speaks to comes to her on this black and white TV, so she has never actually experienced color. Now, I know that's impossible, but you have to kind of go with the actual thought experiment. Now, she's been locked in this room her whole life, and she has been studying all the physical facts that go along with seeing, hearing, all that kind of thing. Now, when she's let out of the room after she learns all of these physical facts, she sees a red rose for the first time. Has she learned anything new about the world? And most people would say, yes, she's learned what it's like to experience the color red.
Yeah.
Which sort of shows, it sort of shows that all the physical facts in the world can't tell you what it's like to experience a particular thing.
It seems to, depending on what you answer, that if you answer that she doesn't learn anything new, then you're sort of a reductionist. If you answer that she does learn something new, then it seems that you at least sort of, with that answer, leaning towards a non-reductionist.
Yeah. It shows that there's actually another property that exists within the world, a phenomenological property. I mean, it should be noted that Frank Jackson is now a physicalist. But back then, he obviously wasn't. He was arguing for the fact that physical facts can't give us all this information.
Are they mutually exclusive, Dave?
Well, that's the question. It could be that all the physical facts would explain what she's feeling. We might not be able to feel it ourselves. But
guys.
It could be the fact that if we...
Oh, no, sorry, never mind. I thought we'd just frozen out for a second there. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just looked at the software and the time hadn't moved. And all of a sudden it's ticking over again. So I do apologise for interrupting.
It's all right. So it could be the fact that it might not tell us what it feels like to experience something, but it might tell us what she's feeling. And it might just be that phenomenological facts aren't facts at all. They're just descriptors. And the actual facts are all the physical facts that go into making up what she's feeling.
So where do you guys, just thinking about it, where do you stand on something like Mary's Room?
Can I ask a question first?
No.
What do you mean by they're not facts?
So if I say that's red, I'm describing some feature of the phenomenology that I'm experiencing.
So the facts would be the wavelength and stuff like that.
The wavelengths, bouncing through the
Okay, that's interesting. Because I guess my view is that someone's phenomenological experience is very different from somebody else's, probably, right? So it would be a fact that person's phenomenological experience is that person's phenomenological experience, right? That's a true statement.
Yeah, I go with the idea that there are actually phenomenological properties. So when I say I see red and that red makes me feel kind of fiery, I'm actually describing some kind of fact about the world over and above just the physical facts that go in to make that up. Yeah. Like when I say a hurricane, I'm not describing just all of these physical properties that go into making it high wind and wet and all that. I'm actually describing the kind of experience that it gives me, and that's still a fact about the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even if you think that everyone's experience is sort of subjective in its own, right? If you're a physicalist, you should think, presumably, that if you know everything going on physically in that person's system, right, you should be able from that derive the experience.
The different experiences.
Yeah. Even if I feel red in one way and you feel red in a different way, right? If you know everything physical about me, then you should be able to sort of understand what it's. I don't know exactly if.
No, that's correct.
you should be able to understand what like
what they're feeling, what his experience, how it differs from another person's experience.
Yeah.
If it was purely physical.
Yeah, just by looking at the physical.
Yeah. But that would still be different from experiencing it yourself.
Yeah. It would be, but it would be having an understanding, which is still something I don't think we even have right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, what would it mean to understand this?
How you feel, Red?
Yeah, because if you like, how would that even work? Like, to understand what this other person is.
Well, see, even then,
experiencing without experiencing it.
Exactly. At the best, even if I could jump into your mind, I'd still be experiencing your mind through the lens of my own mind.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be having your experience. I'd be having my experience of your experience.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how would that work? I think the only way, potentially, is if we could physically record your experience on a data disk and plug it into my brain, and I actually live your experience as you felt it. But then even then we'd say, well, that's still me waking, coming out of the experience and translating it through my own experience again. But I think that's the closest we could get of experiencing someone else's experience, is actually like almost blanking out our consciousness for a period and actually having their consciousness in ours just for that brief bit. But the second ours then boots back up, it's our translation of that, our memory of that. It's us still filtering it through our own mind.
I guess this is a problem that psychology has been trying to figure out for the entire time it's existed. Is explaining the individual's experience through descriptions like that, trying to understand, the thought processes, the psychology behind decision making and behavior, right? And again, I go back to the lateralization of brain function. We're not even scratching the surface, and the big problem that we're having is that a lot of it is self-reported. We have to use self-report measures because we can't use intrusive methods or unethical methods in order to get realistic responses, right? Because of the way that psychology works. So you end up having people telling you, this is how I experience the world, but then that might not actually be an accurate representation of how they actually do experience the world. And I'm not sure at what point there's limitations on that kind of that kind of research. And it's difficult because you can't. It's really difficult to get an objective look at people's kind of thought processes and qualia and stuff like that and their experiences. Even with some of the best psychometric testing that you can possibly make, it's tough.
Yeah, but I don't think necessarily that needs to count against sort of a reductionist physicalist account, because it might just be that it's not possible for you to experience someone else's even if it is reducible, right, to the physical, right? Merely looking at the data could still be different than actually sort of being the system that is experiencing the data, something like that. I don't know, maybe. It's hard to tell. Maybe.
Well, that I guess that would be the thing, right? Is in order to understand someone else's perspective fully, you need to be completely 100% objective, right? You need to be able to be objective to that experience and not look at it through a lens of another experience, and that's just not possible for people. We just can't do that. If you're looking at it through the lens of another experience, then it's what that person's experience is watered down through that lens, because you're associating it with your own experiences.
Yeah.
So even if we were to perfectly kind of describe somebody's experience in whatever, the experience itself will never match that description.
It's ineffable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's possible at all. But I'm not sure if it's not. I don't think it's necessarily because physicalism isn't the answer, or like it's not emergent from physical properties. I think it's because of the limitations of the lenses we're looking through.
Yeah, I might agree with you actually. Yeah. I guess like at least in principle there should be a way though to replicate that, right? Because I guess if you would replicate the same exact brain state or something like that, it should be the exact same experience. Because if it is reducible to brain state, to the physical brain state, then
well, this is yeah. No, you're right.
At least in principle, there should be this possibility that if you replicate the entire brain, right, every single atom of that brain and every sort of state of that brain, somehow keep being you. I don't know even if that makes sense, because it probably wouldn't be
you would become the other person. Yeah,
exactly, you would become the other person.
Yeah,
so like it might be impossible for you to actually experience that, but it still is it still is reduction, it still is reduced to the physical.
And that's my view. Is just that other me as an individual with my neurons and atoms and stuff cannot replicate someone else's, because I don't have those neurons. Like we've spoken about like the issues with fMRI scans before, right? You know, they're the pathways in my brain compared to your brain, any of your brains, is different. There might be similar areas of the brain that we use. There might be similar pathways that we have, but they're not the same. And that means that any experience I have will be very different from any experience you guys have. And my perception of certain stimulus will be different. You know, I have certain phobias. They're not necessarily the most rational thing. I'm sure you guys don't have the same phobias. So when I look at a piece of stimulus, that triggers me into becoming phobic, right? But you guys wouldn't have that because your pathways aren't set up to react to that stimulus in that way. And you might not even have the same neural pathways at all. And it's very difficult. It's such a complex, but in my mind, if we could simulate a brain to every single atom and every single pathway and every single dosage of neurotransmitter and stuff like that, if we had a simulator that would do that, that would be a perfect replication of that individual's experience. That's not possible, though, isn't it? Because that's
but then
you got to think about the simulation; it would be massive, right?
Yeah, but then you would be replicating the entire individual in a sense, right? Like, there would be two of the same individual.
Precisely, yeah.
Which is like, I don't know what that means, because I don't even know. I'm sorry, what?
It's hard to wrap your head around an idea like that.
Yeah, it seems like it would never, like the moment it starts to exist, it would be already different, because it's sort of like
different experiences already.
It can't be that two things are one, right? Like that's sort of, it would be two things that are identical up until a certain point, but from the moment
it's like twins, isn't it?
Yeah, they are different entities at that point.
Yeah, it's like twins. Like, I think you get the exact same genetic code, but their experiences differ them in how they approach things.
Yeah,
and stuff,
it would
development.
It would be even trippier, because like if you replicate that brain, then that has already lived through a number of experiences, then it would be identical even in experience up until the point of the experience, and then it would start to diverge like twins.
Yeah.
Right, but up until that point, it would be identical. So it's a weird thing to think about.
Really weird.
Okay, so one interesting paper. Sorry, but one interesting paper is from William Webster.
It's like Lopali against Becca.
2006. And it's called "Zombies Are Metaphysically Impossible." So he discusses this idea along the lines of Daniel Dennett and people like that, where if there was some being in another possible universe that was exactly like us physically, it would still have our inner experiences, because the inner experiences come from our physical makeup. And they discussed some experiments that had been done. So, like putting pressure on ocular nerves, things like that. And what they found was that they can actually change the qualia that people are experiencing by doing these things. And by messing with certain nerves in the eye, they altered depth perception. So people perceive things and had an experience that a room was longer than it was. They could cause light to come in at a different kind of contrast, different kind of thing. So altering the physical altered the actual mental experience and the qualia that the people had, arguing that this shows that the mind is made up of, it is reducible to physical things even if we don't quite understand it.
I think,
of course, you have the idea where drugs can change our states, our emotions, and
I think it's undoubtedly true that it's almost undeniable at this point that sort of there is a strong correlation, right, in everything.
Yeah, and that's what Chalmers argues, that it's not cause, it's correlation.
Yeah, I mean, you can see if you affect the physical, you affect the mental, and the mental affects the physical in a sense, right? Like that's very uncontroversial to say at this point, and it would be, I think, mistake to discard all of that and make them independent, right? It seems obvious that there is some sort of dependence there. I think it's just the nature of the dependence that is
in question.
Sort of in question, exactly. Right? Like if it is actually, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing.
There's a bunch of ideas that go in, but there is always going to be this mysterious thing, because when we experience the phenomenological, we have these particular type of experiences that feel very distinct from looking at brain states. It seems that there is this correlation between the two, but there seems to be this thing where they are actually distinct properties, not just giving rise to, but there seems to be something inherently mysterious about the actual experience and how it arises and how it comes to be that, say, red causes warmth, blue causes cool, things like that.
Yeah, for me at least, it's not even that much of a thing, because I can see how that can be explained. Sort of, I don't know, like association through growth, right? Throughout your life, you're sort of associating sort of colors with certain things, right? That you're experiencing.
That's the psychology, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like ice is cold and ice is blue, therefore blue becomes a cold color, something like that, right? Like this has sort of some sort of connection in the brain because of pathways.
But then blue can also be a calming color. And there are some people that find red a calming color as well, and not because they're seeing red as blue. And then Steen brought up a point earlier that saying, do people who see red as blue get angry by the color blue? And I don't think they do they?
No, because they're seeing red. The color's the same, it's just that they're perceiving it. If we were to have their eyes or their perception, we'd see it as blue, right? But they're seeing red, and I think that
so they'd have the same association.
Associations are the same because they're usually built into society, or that wavelength has a particular neural pathway that is linked to, that's an evolution-based one, such as yellow and black, for instance, is a warning
danger
sign that's inherent in us. And therefore we use it for steps and stuff like that to say, look, you need to check this step out or whatever. That's an evolutionary trait. And even if I was to see the wavelength of yellow as the color blue in my mind, it's still the wavelength of yellow, so my neural pathway should react in that way. And if it doesn't, that's an impairment, right? So that's an impairment in functioning. And if that was the case, then I would be probably die, and then therefore natural selection would have because I would get stung by a bunch of wasps, and then natural selection would pick me out, and then everyone that did see that as a color that increased their anxiety around that thing would go on and reproduce. So yeah, I think the way we respond to colors is different from our perception of colors. I think they're two different things, two different like functions of the brain.
Yeah.
I think our conscious perception of color is something completely separate from how we actually relate to it.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And I think that's the key for me for a lot of this stuff, is that, you know, what we consciously see and how we experience that thing as well. They're almost like different aspects of our awareness. Like, just trying to think of another example. You know, like for me, you know, so I'm phobic of mushrooms, right? Now,
does my nose scare you?
Sorry?
Does my nose scare you?
Does it have a fungal infection? So, yeah. But like, I can look at a mushroom and I can see it for what it is, right? But it's the concept of a mushroom that freaks me out, right? So it's not necessarily the aesthetic or the color or anything like that that I find disgusting. It's the concept and the like the underlying thing. And I think if I separated those two things out, the like mushroom sweets and stuff don't freak me out. You know how some people get freaked out by like jelly snakes, even because they're phobic of snakes. It's like anything snake related, they get freaked out. But for me, it's this separation. Like I can look at pictures of mushrooms. They kind of gross me out a little bit, but not too bad. It's the concept and the idea of it and what they represent that freaks me out. So I think there's like a separation there between functions that come together and make sense of one thing. And I think that's that illusion of solidarity is the mysterious thing that we are trying to figure out. There's all these different elements that come together, like our sense of touch, our sense of taste, our sense of smell, our sense of self, our sense of our body, our sense of space, our sense of balance. All of these things, we have all these different kind of like things, and they come together to form one experience. Actually, they're all separate things. They're not actually related pretty much in any way. Like the separation of what color looks like and how it makes us feel is two very different things. You know, and I think you can almost consciously separate those two things out. Like when you're listening to music, you can hear it as the sounds it's doing, or you can hear it as the message it's sending, right? Don't you dare! No, I'm not even looking. I'm not even gonna look. I'm not a fool. I heard my phone go off. I saw Philip look up and laugh, and I was like, "No way!" I know what he's done already.
Yeah.
So that's my view on that. Like, it's just, I think it's. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I think that's the kind of like part of the explanation for this all for me is that it's.
Would you say, in a same sort of way, you know, like a psychosomatic response to things? For example, boiled carrots. I wouldn't say I have a phobia, but eating them makes me feel nauseated and I want to throw up. And I feel anxious eating them as well because I know it's going to happen. And
that's gross. Okay. They're downloaded now. It's on WhatsApp.
Yeah, you got them there forever. But if I'm round someone's house and they've done boiled carrots, I can eat other kinds of carrots without any. I think at some point as a kid I must have been force-fed boiled carrots, and it's made me have this response to boiled carrots, and I can. If I focus really hard, separate my feelings for the carrots and almost ignore what I'm doing and eat said carrots. Is that the sort of thing where you can have like a mushroom thing and you separate the concept of the mushroom that makes you feel
like a jelly sweet in the shape of a mushroom, right? I'm not I'm not fussed by that because it's not actually a mushroom, right?
Yeah.
Or like my old supervisor got me a mushroom notepad because she knew I was freaked out by it, and I was like, I used it, right? Because it's not actually a mushroom. So I think yeah, what I'm trying to get at is that just there's loads of different elements to our experience that we kind of draw together and we have it as one. So it's like it's our experience. Yeah. And I think that once we start to separate those things out, and you see it in people with mental illness, like some of their sense of themselves is separated, so people start to dissociate. So they don't necessarily think they look like they're almost like they're watching through somebody else's eyes. For instance, they're dissociated from their actions, right? And that's an issue with the sense of self. That's a break of that kind of that qualia, essentially. Like almost like a bit of it's been taken off and it's been stuck on the side, and someone's qualia experience is actually going through the rest of their experience. Like what we were saying earlier, where we had like if I was to look through your eyes, Joe, it would be like my eyes looking through your eyes, not the other way around. That's the kind of the experience they're having. And I think that it's kind of like it's very fragile, and it kind of makes the illusion that there is actually an experience, just a single experience happening. But Philip, I still don't know. I still can't tell you how that comes to be. I can't tell you how those experiences are made, right? And that's the gap that you want filled.
Yeah, no, yeah, partially,
Sorry.
yes. No, I was just smiling because there are actually like arguments based on sort of dissociation that are made for sort of idealist positions, something like that. I don't know if you.
I do not want to hear those.
Yeah, but there's sort of like a very heavy disassociation theme going on in idealism, at least in sort of Castrop idealism, and that's why it made me sort of.
We understand dissociation. We understand what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he's arguing that we don't. I don't think so, at least.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll have a read.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I was talking about for half that. Like, I feel like I was just saying things. Was anything I was saying relevant?
Yes. I think
okay,
so.
good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. I got really distracted by the mushrooms.
The thing that you're talking about as well, like the sense of self, is also so like a problem to some extent, both on physicalism and on panpsychism actually as well. It's called the combination problem, and it's one of the heavier problems on panpsychism, sort of to figure out, sort of what sort of groups these sort of individual like first person accounts into one cohesive account as one. So you're touching on interesting stuff there.
Good. I mean, I think it's still not the only real kind of current explanation for it is the cognitive model, basically, which is the computer analogy. It's not necessarily the cognitive model, but the computer analogy that you have different systems working at separate places physically separate places, and they come together to produce a conducive experience of a computer, right? So you've got your RAM, you got your graphics card, your sound card, all of that stuff working together, and then you can watch a video on YouTube that has sound, is able to load properly.
Yeah.
And it comes together and it looks like one thing working to get one thing on its own, but actually using all these separate different devices in order to do that. And that's the only analogy that really works. But obviously, a computer is a much simpler kind of system, and it goes like just for kind of some sort of perspective. Freud was using the analogy of a steam train, the way the brain works in terms of like the cognitive model, like using the input and the processing is the fuel burning, and then the output is the train moving, right? That's what he was using, and we're using computers, which are information machines, right? Information processing machines, but it's still not complex enough to actually to be a true analogy of the brain. So, you know, maybe in like 50 years or 100 years or whatever, we'll have a new type of technology that explains it even better than a computer does. But you don't know, do you? Like, it's just so tough to tell what the future holds, especially considering the kind of brink of World War III we're on at the moment, and the natural disasters that are going to happen and all that stuff. And the AI taking over, you know, all of that, all these apocalypses.
Yeah.
They might all happen at once. That'll be interesting. That got dark. I'm sorry. I don't know why I went down that route.
So what was tonight's conversation? Oh yes, consciousness. That's it. So forgetting for the moment that, you know, we're going to go into World War III and our artificial overlords are going to take us over. Unless we
already have done.
Yeah.
Joe, have you thought about that?
Oh, well, how do we know that we're not robots? Oh no, it's because we can click it on the thing. You know, click here if you're not a robot. There you go. You see, that's how we know. That's how we know.
Robots can't lie.
Yeah.
We know this. Robots can't lie.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to build some really good ethical engines, but I think we humans need to understand ethics better. But before we go too far down a completely irrelevant path, Dave, would you like to bring us back on topic?
What was the topic?
Biscuits.
Okay, we can tell we're not robots because one of the first laws of robotics is that we should not allow harm to come to other humans, and we pretty much break that law all the time.
But if all humans are robots, then we're not harming.
Oh my god,
we are robots. Yeah. There are no humans.
Wait, and what if it was a robot that wrote that book to make humans think that robots have those laws?
Meta conspiracy.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered a lot tonight. So,
fair. We definitely did cover a hell of a lot, and we've gone on a number of awesome tangents as well that I thoroughly enjoyed. I apologise if we took us too far away from what you were trying to say, though, tonight, Dave. I think it's something we're probably going to have to come back and have another chat about, because I appreciate the fact that we've gone on a bit longer than our usual stream. Yeah, I know that you need to get to bed and stuff like that, and I'm supposed to be getting up for a meeting at 7 a.m. tomorrow because I can't. I say a meeting, it's one of those ones where I'm supposed to listen, but I need to get up and listen to it because I can't make the 2:30 one. So at least
they have a 7 a.m. one.
Yeah, so because we're a worldwide company, we've got people in different departments. So we tend to do, like, it's usually a 7 a.m. and a 4 p.m, but it's a 7 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. But I'm out at 2:30 p.m. tomorrow, so I need to make sure I'm up for the 7 a.m. one. Yeah. So I mean, Luke, has your opinions changed at all about the hard problems of consciousness tonight?
I think I am probably in a position where I have quite strong beliefs and convictions about this, but I am also aware that the field that I refer to for my information and stuff is very kind of still at the very kind of base stage at the moment. So, and I think that it would be very arrogant for me to just be like, yeah, this is the answer. So I'm open to other concepts and stuff, and I think that stuff that Dave and Phil and yourself, Joe, have discussed, it does make me think about things, and I'm open to being wrong, essentially. But I guess for me, it's just about kind of like, it's like when I stop believing in God, it's like doesn't quite click with me yet, and I need more information before it will. I think the like panpsychism stuff and all that, for instance. But saying that, I haven't done much research into it, so no. But it has actually made me think about doing more research and stuff. Yeah.
So do you think there's an explanatory gap?
I think there is, but I don't think it's one that won't be answered at some point. Still, I'm still optimistic about that.
And where do you think that answer is going to come from? Science or somewhere else?
I don't see why not. Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, fair. And what about you, Philip? What are your thoughts on the topic?
So I definitely have to think about like a few things. Like, I have to rethink some of the things that I was considering, especially like around the whole analogy. That I think I did a very poor job at explaining exactly like what the difference is there, and I have to sort of reread it a bit and figure it out, or maybe just simply like rethink that whole thing. But I still do believe. Actually, I do think that we made some progress, at least for me, in terms of Mary's room and that sort of line of thinking, because that was actually a very interesting sort of little discussion there. I still do think, though, that actually I still can't see how it would be bridgeable, and still sort of non-reductionist about the whole thing. Like, I don't know if panpsychism is the answer or maybe some other kind of theory, but I have a hard time seeing, unless I'm like having some very sort of sharp mental sort of deviation somewhere that is eluding me at the moment. But I have a hard time seeing how it could be, even in principle, sort of bridged by just appealing to sort of the particular mechanics of say the brain or neural sort of pathways or stuff like that. Because it seems to me that it just stays, like the problem stays the same no matter how much sort of information you add at that level. But I like, again, I'm open to sort of being wrong on that, of course, and maybe like learning more about illusionism and other theories, like reductionist theories. Maybe I'll come to a different conclusion at some point.
And Dave, I mean, what about you? Where is your specific position on all of this?
Okay, I'm still kind of formulating my whole thoughts about the whole thing. I hold to a kind of weird property dualism, where I do think that mental states are reducible to physical states in the way that they're realized. It's just that there's this weird sort of dualism that goes on where we have these phenomenological properties and phenomenological experiences, and that's how we see the world and that's how we describe the world, but they still reduce down to actual brain states in a sort of multiple realizability kind of way.
Yeah.
I do think there is an epistemic gap, though. It's something that's hard to explain, especially with the information that we have now. And of course, we can only look at these things through a first-person thing. And when we look at a brain, we can't actually see what they're experiencing. Like Luke says, we can only have first-person responses.
Yeah, and even if we could,
accounts,
or
a third-person accounts.
And even if we could actually jump into someone's brain, we'd still have our account of their account.
Experience of the, I think we have a lot to learn about the mind, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's probably one of the reasons it makes the topic quite so interesting as well, because whilst there is obviously a wrong answer somewhere, and there may be a right answer somewhere, it gives us a lot of room to actually really think about it. You know, it's not as clear cut. There is a lot of unknown, and it opens up a much larger discussion.
I mean, if you think about it, at one point the eye was irreducibly complex.
Yeah, and now look at it. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Wait. I just, all I know is that, you know, I'm going to go with the default null hypothesis, and I'm going to be atheist about panpsychism until it's proven right.
Yeah, that's a good take there.
Do you know, I do wonder if anyone actually thinks you're being serious there. If they are, they probably didn't see your little rant about the null hypothesis a couple of weeks ago. I still need to cut that out as a highlight, I think. Cool. Well, does anyone have any closing thoughts before we go? In fact, are there any additional questions in the chat?
We should do a stream on sort of explanations entirely, I think.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Because
you want to explain explanations? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yes, because
meta
they
explanations.
have so many interesting sort of like they relate to sort of contingency arguments in the PSR as well. Really, like that's a really important topic, because like the sort of stuff with necessitarianism and all of that, if you have a certain model of explanation.
I'll try and set up a stream with actual slides and whatnot.
That would be really, really great.
Awesome. Right. Well, then, if no one else has anything else to say, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who has watched this video, whether it was live or on the rerun, and anyone that's listening into the podcast version. Special thank you to everyone that joined us in the chat, and that was Blandest, Steen, OP, Intrigued Feline, Icarus, Bearded Heretic, you're in there. Bible, did I say Intrigue Feline? I probably did. I'm scrolling up through the chat to see all the comments, sorry. Josiah, Revan Dell, and Dallas Wade. Thank you, all of you, for all of your comments, and hopefully we managed to respond to all of you, and if we didn't, I do apologize. Please, just let us know. If we ever do miss one of your comments, though, ask it again. It's not intentional. It's just sometimes it goes a bit too fast for me to go by, and I'm so caught up in the chat that and my own thoughts as well, that I do miss what you say. So please never stop saying something twice if you need to. So you have been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. Tonight's show has been on the Explanatory Gap. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
Luke.
And I'm Philip.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.